Is there a place in your life where you've dug a hole through the fence and you're running away, or there's a situation in your life where you think is great tribulation and great distress, and you're beginning to think to yourself, maybe I've done something wrong that has caused God to not look favorably upon me? All right, welcome back to The Move, where we are vibing with the book 10 minutes at a time.
The move is officially on the move.
We're
As you
on
can
the
tell,
move.
we're not back in the studio. LRT and the move, we're here in Oregon at a church.
Yeah.
Y'all can follow us on social media if you want to learn more about that. But with that said, the next 10 minutes on the clock are dedicated to Romans chapter 8, verses 31 to 39.
Let's do this. Well, wait. Before we do it, one question. Have you read it? Go read it right now.
Check it out. 10 minutes on the clock,
Let's do it.
starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
So I do want to talk about verse 26. Where are we starting? Verse 31?
Verse 31.
No, we're starting with verse 26.
Okay, go for it.
Just because what catches my attention is that likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness.
What kind of weaknesses are we talking about here?
Well, there's
Like I
any
can't go
number-
to the gym and squat enough?
I can't go to the gym and squat enough. But this idea of vulnerabilities, our vulnerabilities, I think is the word here for weakness, is this idea that in these moments where we are tempted to doubt, or in these moments when we are tempted to not feel confident and secure in what God has spoken through his son, not only what he has spoken through his son, but what he has done through his son, condemning sin, and the evidence that we have in, say, the life of Abraham, right? That the Spirit now comes in and helps us in our weakness. And the beautiful line, well, what the thing about this line is that we have Spirit helping us even while we experience moments of weakness, vulnerability.
Why do we feel that weakness and vulnerability are so diametrically opposed to the confidence that we could have in God? Why are they in opposite sides of the spectrum?
Right, explain that question to me.
Because where he's going,
Yeah.
and we'll see this in verse 35, he talks about like these 7 things that we could experience that could theoretically separate us from God.
Oh, okay.
And Paul's experienced pretty much all of them except
Yes.
for death,
Yes.
but will experience death.
Yes.
And he's saying none of that can separate us.
Yes.
He's combating the common understanding that these things do separate us.
Okay. So there's this, I think I understand. So on the one hand, you have that in my body, I will experience doubt, loss of confidence from time to time, that I will experience circumstances in my life that might really challenge my sense of, hey, this thing is absolutely set and secure, right? Mm-hmm. Those moments could open me up, make me vulnerable to actually lose confidence in the settled belief that God has accomplished what he said he has accomplished in his son, that it's true, and that somehow these circumstances, i.e. the things that are pressing on me and might leave me weak or vulnerable, that these circumstances can somehow speak louder than truth.
Yeah, isn't that weird? How circumstance can speak louder than truth. I mean, on paper, why would that ever make sense? Like, why would just some whispering and some doubt speak louder than the actual word of God? And yet, in the moment, those things do speak so clearly and so loudly.
And that's what's been going on in Romans 8. He's like, the Spirit is within us and it's groaning and it's trying to get out and it's trying to speak and, just speak this loud voice of our confident standing that the sons of God will be revealed and that we are this thing. It's just, it's the tree, the sapling breaking through the ground, right? It's this tree growing up into the fullness of its righteousness, its branches just kind of figuring out what it is so that it can bear fruit unto righteousness. And Paul is saying in that whole experience, you might feel weak and vulnerable, but you have the Spirit.
Yeah.
And the Spirit helps you in those moments. Believe Spirit, don't believe flesh.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that is the guiding principle upon which we are called to live as followers of Jesus.
So then this is where we can get to 8:31.
All right, go for it.
Like, what then shall we say to these things, particularly these things that might assail us? What shall we say to these things that might try to move us from our confidence, right? This is what we say. If God is for us, who can be against us? This question, God is for us. And like, well, Paul, how do I know?
How about the Romans?
Yeah. How about the Romans?
They're
like,
killing all of us.
Like, no. He's conquered death through the resurrected Messiah. Well, Paul, how can I be sure? Paul's like, we saw him.
Yeah.
Like, he's alive, right? So then how he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?
Yeah. Paul here is highlighting several different questions that I think manifest themselves in the life of a believer as they experience a moment of doubt.
Yeah.
And I think all these questions kind of point us towards one undergirding principle, and it's that God is not against you, that God is for you.
Yes.
Evidence in that text you just read, that he wouldn't even give up his own son, but he gave his son for us as the ultimate demonstration that God's heart is towards, not against.
Yes, so that then this is where your faith is grounded.
I'll give you an example. This last weekend, I was traveling with a friend to another part of Washington, and I get a phone call from Emily.
Okay.
And the phone call is, Justin, oh my goodness, Ronan has escaped.
Ooh, okay.
Ronan's my little puppy, less than a year old puppy. He was hanging out at my mother-in-law's, and she went out for a nap because she works nights, and she puts him out into the backyard at noon, comes back at 2 in the afternoon. He had dug a hole under the fence and escaped. And so they're freaking out. They're running all over the place. And Ronan, you've met Ronan, he doesn't like people. So anytime a person's going to come, he's going to run the other way. And we're like, what are we going to do? How are we going to find him? And immediately my heart moves towards Ronan in the sense that I'm moved so much that I just want him back. It doesn't matter what he's doing. Turns out he was at the park chasing squirrels and birds like a stupid animal does. But my heart moved towards Ronan in that moment. And I thought, man, if this is but what a fraction of God, how God feels towards us, what does that say about God?
Sorry, you know what I just squarely landed? Is that one, you have this awesome contact point of faith. You have this moment where you're like, oh man, contrast that between our heart at times and God's heart towards us, even when we dig holes for ourselves and flee.
And we get outside the fence.
We get outside the fence.
Yes.
We're like, oh, we're on the other side. And it's like, no, God is 100% for you.
But
that's the first thing. Right?
Okay.
The second thing I just did that really hit me is that you don't have kids. You talking about your pet.
Yep.
It's good.
Oh, I'm thinking about even Ronan. Ronan has no ability to get back home.
Yeah.
He can't jump that fence back. He can't even find his way back to the house.
Yeah.
The only way that Ronan makes it back isn't through any effort of Ronan, but it's simply through, well, in this case, his mother.
Yeah, that went out looking for him.
Yeah.
So let's move here. 35, right?
Okay.
Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then these questions that he asks, these categories he presents, right? When you go through tribulation in life, will that separate you from the love of God? I mean, you've been through tribulation, been through some heartache.
I don't know if I could accurately describe it as tribulation. But I haven't had always the easiest life in the world.
Yeah, and here's the thing is that your suffering is true suffering, even if it in some sort of scale of objective suffering
is a lesser suffering.
But it's suffering nonetheless.
Sure.
We know what it is to go through that, right?
Right.
Does that actually separate you? Does the moment of tribulation separate you? Paul's like, well, no.
No.
You ever find yourself in distress? I remember growing up, there were times when there wasn't enough food in the fridge, right? And thank God we had godly people that we lived by and that we went to church with. And I remember there were times where they would leave bags and bags of groceries, right? And my mother, I would see the distress on her face, and yet the love of God through these people manifest. So that Paul's asking these questions. Tribulation, will distress, will persecution, famine, nakedness, any of that, danger, sword.
Yeah, we have the sense that if I'm doing everything right, then everything in my life should be going right. And what he's going to highlight here in this passage in verse 36, as it's written, for your sake we're being killed all the day long, we're regarded as sheep to the slaughtered. It's interesting that he quotes this specific psalm, because there's a lot of psalms in which people are complaining about suffering or whatever the case is. But what's unique about this psalm is that, at least as we can read, they were doing things right.
Yep. That's right. In Psalm 44, and I think it's verse 22, they're actually doing things the right way, and yet there's this tribulation that's happening. In Psalm 44, I think verse 17 is like, well, we didn't forget the covenant, and yet we're being killed all the day long. That the circumstances of our lives don't determine the truth of his faithfulness towards us and in us. His faithfulness is revealed in the person of Jesus and in his covenant keeping through Jesus to us, so that anything that we go through, tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, sword, that does not actually remove us from the love of God, but because we're so rooted in the love of God, we can go through those things firmly rooted in who we are because he has spoken.
Yeah. And that's true when we are doing things right, like the psalmist in that chapter.
Yeah.
And that's also true about our life when we maybe aren't doing things all the way right.
So then let me make it plain. Last 24 seconds. Is there a place in your life where you've dug a hole through the fence and you're running away, or there's a situation in your life where you think is great tribulation and great distress, and you're beginning to think to yourself, maybe I've done something wrong that has caused God to not look favorably upon me? What's the word to that person?
You've done something wrong, true, but it doesn't mean that God's against you.
No. Nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus. You might have dug a hole through the fence, but the heart of the Father longs and is 100% active.
There you go. That's 10 minutes. We'll see you tomorrow.